Our next speaker you've heard earlier, let's talk about telling your story, about your timeless legacy. Help us welcome back the Senior VP and Head of Product Design at the New York Times, Georg Petschnigg. There he comes. Here comes George. Let's give him dum, 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 dum. All right. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right.
Wow, wow, wow. All the way from the back of the room. Thank you, everyone. So I've got a really fun story to share, and I should probably start a bit about my personal story. I've only really been in media for 3 years, the last 3 years. For over 25 years, I've been in the depths of technology, working on, I had my break working on high-definition television at Bell Labs. I worked on the first online version of Office. And so throughout my entire career, I've basically been looking at different information processing and handling type of applications. And then started a company called 53, where we made an app called Paper, which was all about building creative tools. But about 3 years ago, I started realizing that there's just actually a real big opportunity between how people are sourcing and acquiring information and how it ends up getting displayed. In short, like how can we actually not just process information, but how do we make the most of that information? So at the New York Times, there's been a really tremendous opportunity to really think through the role of information all the way from farm to table, from how it gets sourced to how it gets presented to people. Now, if you don't know a little bit about the New York Times, it's been around for over 170 years and has been publishing a daily paper. We call it like the Daily Miracle. But there's a through line of innovation. The New York Times was one of the first news sites online, had to think through how to actually bring typographic rendering onto news sites, expanded into a wide range of applications. We now have over 10 million paying subscribers in those. And over the last 3 years, we've expanded the umbrella of the New York Times brand. We've elevated it to cover not just the news, but a wide range of news, information, and lifestyle services from games, cooking, audio, the Wirecutter, and more recently we acquired sports coverage through The Athletic. So what the through line of all of these products is that we really want to create high quality information that help people understand the world and also allow you to engage in it. And so 2 years ago, we published our strategy, which is to become the essential subscription for every curious English-speaking person seeking to understand and engage with the world. I particularly love the last 3 words here, this idea of using information to engage with the world. And I should be really clear, when we say engage, we don't mean activism. What we're saying is like information should really help you make decisions, connect with your neighbors, get involved civically or in different ways, right? But we're not talking about activism here. We're really talking about making information useful and valuable and fit more into your life. So I'll share briefly the strategy and the development process and how we got to that vision. And it is through a process called envisioning. It's a design-led approach where we take a number of inputs from an editorial vision. This is driven by the newsroom, to sort of our brand objectives, to our product strategy. We're looking at audience needs, research. And what design in this process really does is take all those inputs and translates them into artifacts. It's a rigorous process at which end you have something that an organization can assess and evaluate, provide feedback on, and lean in on, right? It's that transformation of sort of, at the times very text-based and data-based inputs into something that's visual and tangible and relatable. Envisioning plays out over multiple time frames and time horizons, right? I mean, at an organization scale of the New York Times, right, you need to think over multiple chapters. So, the envisioning process for the essential subscription was really a process that targeted a time horizon that is about 3 to 5 years out. In that time horizon, you can think about building out new capabilities, new editorial flows, the adoption of new technologies. Oftentimes, you don't necessarily know exactly what the requirements are to achieve that type of vision. But that is where sort of the sustained true net new value comes from, right, when you take sort of that long-term view. And the bulk of the work then happens more in terms of envisioning happens then sort of in the 1 to 2 year time horizon, right? Where it's about nurturing emerging businesses. Here we invested in games and cooking and the improvement and increase of like sort of our publishing tooling, and I'll share a bit more about that. On the product strategy front, right, there were sort of three big driving motives. The first one was, of course, the New York Times has to be the best news destination in the world. Right? That's what we strive to do. But then we can also be more valuable to more people by meeting everyday life needs, right? That's where sort of games, cooking, Wirecutter comes into play. And lastly, from a product design perspective, you want to then expand and connect that product bundle together so that user can easily move throughout it and really find sort of an engagement and value no matter where they come. So the approach we took was to actually think through a lot of these vectors and facets through the design of a next generation New York Times app. Again, what I'm going to show here is illustrative of a future. You will have to wait and subscribe to see what's actually going to happen, but it's pretty. You will understand sort of how we're using these artifacts to really shape of what's being built. The first one, a lot of the work has to be grounded in user insights, and I love looking at some of these insights that we saw. Like, well, what are some of these qualities that people expect from a pay-for news and information service? And there were sort of 3 qualities, essential qualities that came up. The first one is like people are looking for exploration. And it's this idea that there has to be discovery that pays off in some form. And it directly translated into different ways of having to navigate like an expansive content universe like the New York Times. Being able to search, being able to like find editorial pathways through it, and also really identify related concepts. Another essential quality is about memory. Like, well, once you make those discoveries and those learnings, you want to hold on to them some way. Your product experience wants to have some type of history and reflect that back to the user, right? It's Scott Belsky, I loved how he was saying, is like, you can't just re-welcome the person on square zero every time they come. Like, they want to see themselves reflected in the product. And the last essential quality we looked at was around tailoring, right? And tailoring is really a blend between personalization and recommendations, right? The product should feel bespoke and tailored towards you. And again, we did this work many years ago, but it's interesting, to think again through these qualities with the advent of new technologies like AI. And I think they're still just as relevant now. So always a good sign for good research if they stand the test of time. The next piece was coming in, is really then working through a product vision along with the newsroom. So this is something that's probably more very applicable to the New York Times. It's not just about building a product, but also building all of sort of the editorial and content systems along with it. The way we approach this here is through systems of, we call these signature experience briefs, where we work with the newsroom to identify and really answer some of the basic questions of how should sort of the journalism really work in people's lives? How should commenting work? How should saving work? How should marking work? How should how could we give people a better sense of being where the reporting is happening? So we distilled that down into 5 experience briefs and then layered all of this up into then different types of interaction models. So here's a set of exploration of 4 different models. We ended up in one model that we called Flex, where we surrounded our main home feed was a set of panels that really created a much broader and expansive view on what the Times universe could be. So here's just sort of like fast forward to almost the end. But again, what you're seeing here is this idea of the New York Times home feed surrounded by, on the right, are different types of coverage from beat reporting to opinions to our signature journalism, really contextualizing and showing the different types of news the New York Times produces and the different ways how a person could use it, such as following, say, a storyline or hearing more a debate around a topic. And towards the left, you're seeing an expansion into more of the lifestyle services, audio, games, cooking, Wirecutter. Again, just a reminder, this is illustrative. You will have to just watch and see what happens, and it's pretty cool. Nothing like actually seeing real code ship. Now, once you have sort of this expanded canvas, you start seeing and recognizing, well, what are sort of the needs that now arise from that? What are sort of the new workflow capabilities that we need for the newsroom to be able to program that more expanded canvas. And I'll just sort of illustratively share like what this looks like. You know, imagine like sort of what goes into the curation of our homepage. You know, there are roughly like 3,000 journalists at work reporting stories throughout the different world, right? So it's, you know, they'll produce about 55,000 different content pieces in any given year. So every day it's about, you know, 180 plus pieces. And on home, there are about, you know, 80 different slots in which you could surface those stories, right? So you can almost think of it as a mapping problem, but, you know, we call it editorial and curation. And the architecture of the homepage addresses a multitude of needs. At the very top of the page, you know, the newsroom will surface sort of the most important top stories of the day. This is what's happening in the course of a 24-hour time period, like the most important sort of most newsy stories and urgent stories of the day will go there. But on the right rail, you'll see sort of counter-programming. You'll see some of our opinion work surface there. And also, you know, the in case you missed it modules. And those are, you know, like some of those are algorithmically driven. And they need to be, because what happens is that, you know, you'll have like really big stories break, say like, you know, the Supreme Court overruling Roe versus Wade. Now there's this flurry of news stories that's being produced. Hundreds of stories are being produced. And, you know, for a news junkie who's there and who's read every one of those stories, that's one way of presenting this information. But if someone's just casually checking in, you know, 3 days into like this unfolding event, they will want a very different set of stories be presented. And that's sort of matching now sort of where is the customer in their journey versus sort of the information status is something where we're relying on an algorithmic help for doing exactly that. There are other things that will then surface, right? Whereas for an American customer, like a reader, like Roe v. Wade is a thing. For the rest of the world, you have to describe it as America's abortion law. It's a pretty, like, you know, it's obvious when you see it, right? But it's one of those things where, like, you know, as the reporters are in the field doing the reporting, right, having some guidance in that relationship sort of between sort of the machine and the algorithmic identification of patterns and the human curation is sort of something that we're really leaning into. And as you get further down to the page, you'll get into areas like, you know, our sub-brand coverage. On the back-end side, what we've done is unified a lot of our content management systems across the different properties to sort of foster a stronger sense of presence and collaboration around our newsroom. And on the data side, this is actually a profound piece of work that's underway, is also like unifying what we call now our entity store, where a lot of the fact bases and the content pieces that are being produced are actually stored presentation agnostic in a centralized form, right? And that's important so that we can actually foster better workflows and collaboration. I'll take sort of the last 2 minutes to just mention like how we think about sort of design as an ongoing differentiator in this. Here is a set of 5 sort of UX tenets that my team and the designers within the New York Times have identified that sort of produces, you know, our distinguished products. The first attribute we really designed for is clarity. Clarity in this case is sort of the antidote to a world that gets more complex and more complicated. Again, we don't strive for simplicity. Nothing in the world really is all that simple. But what we can do is show distinctions, highlight what's new, what's different, what's worth someone's time, and that's sort of what's represented by clarity. The second big tenet for us is optimizing for time well spent, and this one really makes a massive, huge difference. Whereas many products today seem to want to consume all of your time and just keep you scrolling and keep you hooked. Like, our objective is to really lead a user to learning. Whether they have 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes to spend, whatever amount of time you want to spend at the New York Times, like, you should come away from having learned something new. That is actually the underlying, like, if there was some secret sauce to our games right now, it is that they're all designed for lightweight engagement or deeper engagement, but you will always come away from having learned something new. Fun fact, actually, some of the top search definition searches on Google are driven by connections or a recent game. Uncommonly high standard of craft. the Time has a legacy of really investing in design and investing in rich representation of everything from fonts to photography, right? Delight and polish is directly linked to people's willingness to pay, right? So let's just be really clear. It is more pleasant, more beautiful to use, but also something that's worth paying for. Accessibility to the curious is key. We have an ability to convene a wide range of people, so the product experience itself has to be accessible. And lastly, trust for us is paramount. We deal with sensitive topics, we deal with important topics, we deal with lightweight topics like love and relationships as well. But at the core, we're in a trust relationship with our readership. And for us, this means that the product experience and the journalistic experience need to be integral and integrated as a whole. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Big hand for George. Thank you so much. A lot of great information, and I appreciate the concept of optimized as far as not just spending time to spend time. So one more hand for George.